So I want to start this deep dive with a really blunt, direct question. Who authorized the use of smallpox to extricate Native Americans?
Yeah, it's a heavy question. And honestly, it's one that gets repeated everywhere, right? In classrooms, online, in political debates.
Right, exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to really get into this. Whether you're a student of American history or just someone looking for the absolute truth behind the legends, we're doing a myth versus fact reckoning here.
And we should warn you right up front, the tone of this discussion is going to be pretty sober. It's extra measured today because we are dealing with mass death by disease and, frankly, the deliberate killing of unarmed people.
Yeah, we have to look at the archival evidence without flinching.
Exactly. Our central task is to separate documented fact from legend. And to just answer that initial question right away, there is exactly one well-documented, deliberate attempt to use smallpox. Just one.
Wait, really? Just one?
Just one. And it happened in 1763. It was carried out by the British at British-held Fort Pitt before the United States even existed.
Wow. Okay, so all the other stories.
Right. It was outside of any treaty during a war. And even then, as we'll see, historians actually dispute whether or not it even worked.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the famous story, the one I think everyone has heard of, is the 1837 Great Plains smallpox blanket story.
Right, where the claim is that the U.S. Army intentionally spread it.
Yeah. And that 1837 epidemic was a devastatingly real tragedy, obviously. But the claim that the Army engineered it, it's totally fabricated.
Completely fabricated. And the real story is actually more damning, honestly.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. state rarely needed an engineered plague.
I mean, they had other methods.
Exactly. They relied on meticulously documented massacres and engineered starvation. The state didn't need to hide behind a virus.
So let's start at the very beginning of the timeline. Let's go to that one real incident, Fort Pitt, 1763.
Right. So you have to picture the context here. It's the spring and summer of 1763 during Pontiac's War. This is a pre-national extra-treaty event.
And Fort Pitt is under siege, right?
Heavily under siege. And smallpox is already naturally circulating in the region. The British garrison has actually set up a smallpox hospital just to isolate their own sick soldiers.
So it's already a nightmare scenario inside the fort.
Total nightmare. High fevers, pustules, agonizing pain. And in an enclosed, besieged 18th century fort. It's terrifying.
And this is where we get to the granular, just chilling proof from the archives. Because a man named William Trent, he was a trader and a militia captain inside the fort, he keeps a journal.
Yeah, a very detailed journal of the siege.
And I'm looking at his entry for June 24th, 1763. He records a parley with emissaries from the Delaware, the Lenape people, and he writes that the garrison gave them, quote, 2 blankets and a handkerchief out of the smallpox hospital.
It's right there in ink.
And he adds this damning line right after. He writes, quote, I hope it will have the desired effect.
Yeah, he states the murderous intent as clearly as possible. And it wasn't just a private diary entry either. There's a literal paper trail of state-sponsored bio-warfare here.
Right, the invoice.
Exactly. On August 13th, 1763, Trent's trading firm actually bills the Crown. They submit an invoice for reimbursement for the items. Quote, taken from people in the hospital to convey the smallpox to the Indians.
They literally put a biological weapon on an expense report.
Yeah, expecting it to be paid out of the military budget. It's staggering bureaucratic detachment.
And it wasn't just Trent, right? The commanders were talking about this too.
Oh, absolutely. You have simultaneous, independent written correspondence between the highest levels of command.
Sir Jeffrey Amherst, right.
Yes. Amherst was the British commander-in-chief in North America, and he's writing to Colonel Henry Bouquet, who's marching relief force through the wilderness to try and break the siege of Fort Pitt.
And we have their letters. In late June 1763, Amherst literally asked Bouquet if smallpox, quote, could not be contrived to send among the disaffected tribes.
Right. And Bouquet writes back in mid-July, explicitly proposing that they distribute blankets. He says he'll try to inoculate them with blankets that might fall into their hands.
And Amherst approves it.
He approves it and urges Bouquet to use, quote, every stratagem in our power. And then he uses this phrase that historians always cite. He calls to, quote, extirpate this execrable race.
Extirpate, to root out and destroy completely.
Zero ambiguity. The commander-in-chief was ordering complete eradication.
But wait, here's a really analytical observation, and I want to push back on this a bit. We have the smoking gun, the intent, the act, but did the bullet actually hit the target?
That's the big question.
Because the timeline is weird. Trent gave the blankets on June 24th. But Amherst and Bouquet were writing those letters in late June and mid-July.
Right, the dates are slightly offset. The gift from the hospital and the letters between the commanders are separate strands of the exact same murderous impulse. It's not a direct chain of command where Amherst ordered Trent to do it.
They just all independently had the same horrifying idea at the same time.
Exactly. But regarding whether it worked, this is heavily debated among historians, like Philip Randlett, for example.
Why wouldn't it work? I mean, smallpox on a blanket seems pretty straightforward.
You would think so, but biology is complicated. Dried variola virus on old fabric is actually a really poor vector for transmission. The viral load degrades with heat and sunlight.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the virus spreads best through airborne respiratory droplets. Prolonged face-to-face contact with someone coughing. Carrying a dry blanket miles through the woods just diminishes the infectious potential.
And you mentioned the disease was already circulating anyway.
Exactly. It was already burning through the region via traders and captives. So any outbreak that winter cannot be scientifically isolated to Trent's 2 blankets. The fire was already raging.
So the takeaway for you listening is this. The intent was established and undeniably evil, but the actual effect remains historically unknown.
Right.
So if the only documented case was British in 1763, where on earth did the legend of the American military handing out smallpox blankets come from?
Well, to figure that out, we have to jump forward 74 years to the 1837 epidemic. And we have to start by acknowledging the genuine catastrophe of that event.
Because the death toll was horrific.
Unfathomable. In the spring of 1837, the American Fur Company sends a steamboat, the St. Peter, up the Missouri River.
Which was the main trade artery.
Right. And it's carrying a crewman who is infected with smallpox. This travels by ordinary contagion up the river, hitting virgin soil populations with no immunity.
And the Mandan people were the hardest hit, weren't they?
They were. They had these thriving agricultural villages near the Knife River. The population was roughly 2,000 before the summer of 1837.
2,000.
And by the fall, they were reduced to a few dozen survivors.
Just a few dozen. That is, I mean, that's the end of a world.
It is. Ultimately, over 17,000 people along the Missouri died before it burned out around 1840. The Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Arikara, the Blackfeet.
So the tragedy is an undeniable historical fact. But the popular claim is that the U.S. Army deliberately handed out infected blankets from an infirmary to start this outbreak.
And that is where the fabrication comes in. That specific claim completely collapses under scholarly scrutiny.
Where did that even come from, then, if it's totally fake?
The modern version of this deliberate intent story traces largely to a writer and former University of Colorado professor named Ward Churchill, mostly in the 1990s and early 2000s.
He published this as academic fact.
He did. He alleged the Army actively distributed these blankets, and he had footnotes and citations to back it up.
But other scholars actually checked his homework.
Exactly. A historian named Grenner Louis and a sociologist named Thomas Brown independently checked Churchill's footnotes. And they found that the sources did not say what Churchill claimed they said.
Wow.
Brown assessed that the incident was entirely fabricated. Churchill had heavily cited a prominent scholar named Russell Thornton, but Thornton never claimed the Army handed out blankets in 1837.
He just completely misrepresented the source material.
He did. And ultimately, Churchill's was dismissed from his university position for research misconduct, specifically falsification, in 2007.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because debunking the myth doesn't somehow let the U.S. off the hook.
No, not at all. The actual record is still an indictment. It's just a different kind of crime.
It's negligence versus conspiracy.
Exactly. The disease came up the river via ordinary contagion. A crewman was sick. The passengers weren't isolated. And the captain of the St. Peter reportedly refused to quarantine because he didn't want to lose time and profit.
And they knew about quarantine back then.
Oh, absolutely. They fully understood how smallpox spread.
And there's this really famous historical document from this time, the lament attributed to Meadowtope, also known as Four Bears.
Right, the second chief of the Mandan.
He had this long history of friendship with white traders, but the epidemic just destroyed his people. He died on July 30th, 1837. And his final speech, which survives secondhand via a trader's journal, Francis Chardin, it's this furious denunciation of white men for bringing the ruin.
But crucially, if you read that text, he names no blankets. He names no army. He blames the traders for bringing the disease, which was true, but there's no mention of a biological weapon.
It's like, okay, here's an analogy. It's the difference between a calculated biological weapon and gross fatal negligence.
Right.
Like a factory manager seeing a toxic leak into a town's water supply and just refusing to shut down the plant because it would hurt quarterly profits.
That's a perfect analogy. And to take it a step further, the government actually had the cure.
Right. The Indian Vaccination Act of 1832.
Exactly. The U.S. had the smallpox vaccine. They had a mandate. But they largely failed to extend those vaccinations to the upriver nations on the plains.
It's a failure to quarantine and a failure to vaccinate.
A damning failure of the state.
Mm.
But it's not a secret military conspiracy.
Which really makes me wonder, why does this fabricated blanket story persist so stubbornly despite all the scholars debunking it?
Because it gestures at an emotional truth. The United States did set out to destroy the plains nations. The legend is just aimed at the wrong weapon.
That is such a critical point. It shifts the paradigm.
We have to move from the idea of an invisible virus to the sober reality of face-to-face state violence. Because the state rarely needed engineered plague. They had massacre, they'd engineered starvation, and ecological warfare.
And these aren't whispered legends. These are written in official reports.
Right. Let's trace the chronology of these documented massacres between 1863 and 1890. And I should note for the listener, all casualty numbers we're discussing are estimates and ranges, usually reported by the perpetrators themselves, but they let you judge the sheer scale of the violence.
Let's start with Bear River, January 29th, 1863.
Right. Colonel Patrick Edward Connor leads California volunteers against a winter camp of northwestern Shoshone.
A winter camp, so mostly families just trying to survive the cold.
Exactly. They surrounded the camp and opened fire. The casualties are estimated at roughly 250 to 400 Shoshone men, women, and children.
That's one of the deadliest single attacks in U.S. history.
It is. And it normalized this doctrine of attacking vulnerable winter camps, which leads directly to Sand Creek on November 29, 1864.
Sand Creek is just, it's horrific. Colonel John Chivington, who was a Methodist minister, by the way, leads Colorado cavalry against a Cheyenne and Arapaho village.
A village that believed they were under U.S. protection.
Right. The leader, Black Kettle, was flying a white flag of truce and an American flag over his lodge.
And Chivington's troops ignored the flags. They attacked at dawn, killed and mutilated an estimated 150 to 230 people, mostly women, children, and the elderly.
But the archives are what's so important here, because Congress actually investigated this.
They did. The 1865 Congressional Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War.
And they explicitly condemned it. I'm looking at the quote. They said this was no fog of war accident. They stated Chivington had, quote, surprised and murdered in cold blood people who had every reason to believe they were under the protection of the United States.
The U.S. Congress officially called it cold-blooded murder.
But it didn't stop the violence.
No, the impunity just continued. January 23, 1870, you have the Marias Massacre or the Baker Massacre.
Major Eugene M. Baker's troops strike a pagan Blackfeet camp. But they struck the wrong band.
Right. They attacked the peaceful camp of Heavy Runner, who actually had a written promise of protection from the government.
And he ran out waving the paper, didn't he?
He did, and they shot him down. They killed about 170 to 200 people, again, mostly women, children, and the old. And Baker faced virtually no consequences.
Which brings us to Wounded Knee, December 29, 1890.
Right. Colonel James W. Forsyth and the 7th Cavalry botch a disarmament of Spotted Elk's band, also known as Bigfoot, who was incredibly sick with pneumonia at the time.
They used rapid-fire Hotchkiss mountain guns against the camp, right?
Yes. Between 250 and 300 Lakota were killed. Fleeing women and children were chased down for miles.
When you synthesize all of this, Bear River, Sand Creek, the Marias, Wounded Knee, these aren't hidden conspiracies.
No, they were actions carried out by military units, investigated by Congress, fully documented.
And the myth of the 1837 blanket kind of softens the blow, doesn't it? By making it this invisible virus instead of the archives showing us deliberate face-to-face state violence.
Exactly. It distances us from the reality of soldiers looking at a leader with a white flag and pulling the trigger.
But the rifle wasn't the only weapon the state deployed. There was a slower, more systemic method to empty the plains.
Ecological warfare.
Engineered starvation.
Right. The military understood the deep connection between the Plains nations and the buffalo. The buffalo was their economy, their shelter, their food.
The ecosystem was the target.
Yes. Destroying the herds would break the nations. and the policy behind this slaughter is explicitly documented.
We have to bring in General Philip Sheridan here. He was overseeing the Plains Wars for the Army.
Right, but at one point, the Texas legislature was actually considering a bill to protect the bison because the civilian hide hunters were slaughtering them so fast.
And Sheridan argued against protecting them. He literally said that the hide hunters were, quote, destroying the Indians' commissary.
An ecosystem defined as an enemy supply depot.
He urged the legislature to thank the hunters and allow them to, quote, kill, skin, and sell until the buffaloes are exterminated.
Kill, skin, and sell. And this wasn't just Sheridan. We have testimony from Richard Henry Pratt, the founder of the Carlisle Indian School. He stated plainly that, quote, the general destruction of the buffalo was ordered as a military measure.
Now, for our listeners looking for collegiate-level analysis, there is a historical debate here, right?
Yeah, there's debate over whether there was a formal, top-down written order to destroy the buffalo, or if it was just a commercial market slaughter that the military encouraged and utilized.
But regardless of the exact mix of commerce and command, the outcome was engineered as a deliberate strategy.
Absolutely. The demographic crash is staggering. Mid-century, the buffalo population was estimated at 60 to 70 million. By the early 1880s.
How many?
A mere few thousand.
From 60 million to a few thousand.
Right.
So what does this all mean for the people living there?
Mass starvation. The nations that depended on the buffalo were forced onto reservations to keep from starving to death.
Starvation by design.
And once they were on the reservations, the government weaponized the food rations to force assimilation and land cessions.
Wow. So bringing this all to a final reckoning for you listening, we started this deep dive looking for a deliberate biological attack authorized by the U.S.
And we found a horrifying myth built on fabricated research and one real, isolated British incident from 1763.
Right. And focusing on that false smallpox blanket legend actually does a huge disservice to history.
It does. It obscures the incontrovertible paper trail of what the United States actually did.
Engineered starvation, military massacres, the destruction of an entire ecosystem.
Right.
And why does this exactitude matter to you? Why get so specific about debunking the blanket myth? Because when we rely on myth, history is easily dismissed by deniers.
Exactly. If your history is built on Ward Churchill's fake footnotes, people can dismiss the very real suffering. But when we rely on the archives, the truth is inescapable.
We don't need a legend to prove the state's intent. The state's own invoices, their military correspondence, the congressional records, they are damning enough.
We have to face the history as it was actually documented.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to explore on your own. If our culture so readily embraces the myth of a secret, villainous plot like some rogue agent handing out infected blankets, does that simply make it easier for us to digest the past?
It's a good question.
What does it say about us that a secret biological conspiracy is somehow an easier story to tell ourselves than the reality of a modern bureaucracy publicly, legally voting to starve populations and massacre villages under flags of truce? Think about that the next time you hear a historical legend that sounds just a bit too cinematic. The truth is usually filed in the archives, and it is far harder to look away from.